right. Thank you all for joining us this evening for our fourth and final webinar in the Backyard Poultry series. I'm Carol Stringer. I am the Fulton County Agricultural and Natural Resources Agent, and this webinar series has been presented by Fulton County. So tonight's speaker is going to be Dr. Claudia Dunkley, who will be talking about laying hen management and behaviors. She is part of UGA's Poultry Science Department and is a professor. Please remain muted during the session, and as you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box and we'll address them all at the end of the session. All right, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Carol, for that introduction. Good evening, everyone. I hope you are ready to hear something about small layer flock production, and I also have a little behavior at the end of the series. Okay, so usually if this was face-to-face, I would ask how many people already have layers in their backyards. I can see one hand up there. I see Sue. I'm not seeing everybody though. And a lot of people really like having birds in their backyard. People will grow a small flock for any number of reasons. They might just love seeing birds flying around in the yard, chirping, pecking around, or they might want eggs. So that's the first question I usually ask. Why do you want to grow chickens? Now, the decision must be made why you want to grow chickens to produce eggs. Do you want chicks, right? So do you want a replacement flock, or do you want to eat these eggs? Now, if you want chicks, you're going to need to have a rooster or two, depending on the amount of hens that you have. But if you don't want chicks and you only want eggs, you do not need to have a rooster, because a chicken will lay an egg whether or not a rooster is around. Now, you can do both things, right? Both things can be done, but you have to monitor it, right? So you can eat fertile eggs as long as the hen was not sitting on those eggs and starting to incubate it. So you have to make up your mind from early. If you're going to eat the fertile eggs, you have to start collecting them as soon as they are laid. Okay, so the first thing you think about when you're getting the birds, where are you going to put them? What are you going to put them in? How are you going to confine them? You have to provide enough room to accommodate the growth of the birds. So the minimum amount of space that you need is going to depend on the breed of bird. Typically, we say we should have a spacing of about 0.7 to 1 square foot per bird for the birds that are small. So for the smaller breed birds. For the bigger breed birds, you would want about 3 to 3.5 square foot. And that would be enough or adequate space for those birds to grow. So for example, if you start with 50 chicks and you decide to use 25 of them for meat and then keep 25 for egg production, and of course you expect to lose 1 or 2, so you'll have less than that 50 that you started out with. So if you allow each bird 3 square foot, that would mean that you need about 75 square feet for those 25 birds that you're going to grow. And a house of, say, 8 by 10 would be adequate space for those birds. But whenever you're constructing, remember to make your plans for future expansion, because a lot of times people get very excited about it and start to build upon what they have. So make sure you have that space where you can actually expand your housing. Brooding is very important when you are hatching chicks. And not only when you're hatching chicks, it's important. It's important when you get your day-old chicks, right? You have to brood them. You have to provide that heat for them, because day-old chicks or young chicks, they cannot generate their own heat. So that's why you'll see them all huddled up together. So you want to provide the right temperature for them. So the temperature within the room or within that house that you have them should not fall below 70 degrees Fahrenheit. You want to have them, when you get these chicks, you put them in an environment that has about 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and make sure you don't just put the temperature is not what you feel. It should be that at that 90 degrees Fahrenheit down at that chick's level for the first week, right? And you're gonna drop that temperature by 5 degrees each week until the chicks are 5 weeks old. Now, so you decide that you're having the chicks, so you need some brooding equipment. So this is an example of what these brooding equipment can look like if you're going to buy the expensive one from the off the internet or from the Tractor Supply store. So you need a heat lamp. Of course, you have to buy the bulb separate, and you need a feeder, water that's inside that enclosure. You're going to put some bedding in, whether it is pine shavings or straw, and you have an enclosure. You have it enclosed so that the chick stays within that area where the lamp is. So during normal weather, that infrared heat lamp should be placed about 1 to 1.5 feet above the chick, right? So that's what I was talking about. Don't just think that the heat is going to be that 90 degrees all the way up. You have to have it down at the chick level, and that will provide enough heat for them. And the cardboard box, or some people will even go and brood them in, say, some plastic containers, right? Small flock producers are very innovative when it comes to rearing their chicks. So anything that you can keep the chicks close enough, but not too close, right? Because if it gets hot, they should be able to get away. So unlike this picture that we have down here, if they were in that very small area and the heat it would get too hot there for them, right? So they should be able to get away, and you should have it about 1 foot to 1.5 foot above the level of the chick. So that diameter of 6 feet is enough. This picture here that I'm pointing on, that is too big an area, so it's too spaced out, right? You need something closer to the birds. You can tell what the temperature is by hanging a thermometer at the same level of the chick, right? So attach a thermometer to that heat lamp, and then you can see what the temperature is to make sure that they're getting the right temperature each week. And how you adjust the temperature using these heat lamps is by raising the lamp by a few inches each week. And remember, you have your thermometer that will let you know what the temperature actually is. Nutrition is very important for birds, and we can't just feed them scratch corn, right? They love to eat that. Birds are grain feeders, so they like to peck at things. They'll eat insects, they'll eat even the grass. But you have to be feeding them something that will enhance whatever they can find in their surrounding if you have them outside, right? Too much scratch corn is going to dilute their nutrition, and that will slow down the growth of these birds. Chickens require different amount of nutrients depending on the age of the bird, and also depending on the type of the bird. So our layer is going to require different nutrients than, say, a chick or than a bird that you're growing for meat. So we have different categories of feed, and all of these feeds can be had at the farm store. So we have our starter feed or starter ration, that's for very young chicks. And then we have our grower feed for the developing chick, the finisher feed for the adult broiler type chicken. And then for those birds that you're going to lay the eggs, they get the layer mash, or it can be crumble or pellets. So the layer ration will come in different forms. So when do you give them what ration? So the starter ration can be given from day 1 to about 6 weeks old, right? And expect to feed them at least 4 pounds per bird for that period of time. The commercial grower ration can be fed from 6 to 18 weeks. And I say 18 weeks because those would be the birds that you are growing to lay, right? So that's why you'll be feeding them that for that period of time. And of course, most of the feed store actually carry a combination of starter grower, so you don't have to switch feed. You can just go ahead and get the starter grower ration from the beginning, and that will work for both stages of growth for the birds. So from 18 weeks onwards, and remember, when I talk about 18 weeks, I'm talking about those birds that you're gonna get the eggs from, right? Those birds who will now be your layers. At 18 weeks onwards, you want to start feeding them that layer ration, because then this feed is going to be preparing them for egg production. Now, these next 2 points I have here are very important. That's why I have it in red. You do not want to feed layer ration to your younger chicks, nor do you want to feed that starter grower ration to your birds that are producing eggs, because they don't have the right amount of nutrient that is required for each of these different stages of growth for these birds. And the problems that are associated with the inadequate nutrition, those you see them rapidly. You quickly see that they're not getting the right nutrients, and often the harm that's done is irreversible. So we have free range birds, and these birds are the ones that you have out in the yard, whether you have them as with their cages that's moving in the different parts of the land, pasture flock, or you just have them in the backyard and they run around and they come in to roost at night. These birds will supplement their diets with greens that they can get, and also with insects. Now, if you have them in an enclosed area, that greens will not last for long. And I'm sure many of you who have birds and have them outside like that know that, right? The grass won't last for long. And it's okay for you to cut and give them grass, but make sure that it's not treated with chemicals. You can also give them table scraps, as this provides variety to their diet. And this can also help to reduce the feed costs, because you're not using as much feed that you buy from the feed store. However, you want to limit the amount that you give to them. Give them this more like a dessert rather than a meal. And you never want to give your birds feed stuff that's spoiled, right? So if you have feed left over from a flock before and you notice it's a little moldy, never give that to your birds. Talking about moldy feed, you have to try to keep the feed stable, right? And it's more stable in the winter when it's clear and dry, not when it's damp. But there are some molds that can grow rapidly at low temperatures also. And some of these molds actually produce toxins which are harmful to the birds. Aflatoxin is one of the most popular ones that we know of that will harm the birds. So you want to protect the feed from humidity, right? And this is important whether or not the weather is warm or cold, right? Protected from humidity. So you store in a cool, dry area. All right, so this next slide, I'll be talking about feed form, right? The feed can come in 3 different forms: mash, crumble, or pellet. And if we remember, birds are actually grain feeders, right? If they were in the wild, they'd be eating berries and they'll be eating insects, right? They would not be eating this mash thing or constantly have a meal that is crumbled, right? So they are grain feeders. Now, depending on how the feed is presented, you'll see how they are accepting of that feed, right? So again, we have mash, crumble, and pellet. Now, all three of these, they have the same ingredients, right? The same ingredients, just the end product is different. So it all started out as mash, then it's sent through a pelleter. And then from the pelleter, you can buy it as mash, or it can be sent through the pelleter, you buy it as a pellet, or if you want it crumble, it's then sent through a crumbler and you get that crumble, right? So they have the same nutrients in it, just that the form it is presented in is different. Diets that's too finely grounded up often will reduce feed intake. So for the mash diet, you often find more wastage compared to, say, the crumbled or the pellet diet, because the birds are going to go in and start trying to pick out the bigger pieces of feed. And you'll see them use their beaks and start shifting around the feed to get the bigger particles. So you don't want to have too many fine particles, because that will also result in a lot of dust. So you don't want a lot of dust in the houses either. And too many coarse particles is going to lead to selective eating, because as I said, the birds are going to start looking for the bigger pieces. So if you have too many coarse particles, they'll pick out the bigger particles and selectively pick out the bigger particles and leave back some of the nutrients that's left in the finer particles. And of course, if you have too many coarse particles in the diet, that can lead to separation of the feed. So theoretically, pelleted or crumbled feed will result in higher consumption of feed. But that is presupposing that the feeding system that you're passing, the containers that you're passing the feed through, and that the raw materials give you good quality pellets. So if you don't use the right raw materials, even though it's pelleted, the birds are not gonna really take to it if you don't have the right ingredients in that. And I'm saying this because some people like to formulate their own feed. So it's important that you know these things about the different forms of feed. You want to feed the pellet or crumbled form during the first 4 to 5 weeks, because you know that's during the time when the birds are developing, and you want to ensure that they're getting all of the nutrients that's necessary for them to grow and develop properly. Water is the next nutrient. It's very important, right? It's a nutrient also, but it's often overlooked. You want to provide a constant supply of clean, fresh water for the birds. And 20 hens will consume about 1 gallon of water each day if the weather is cool. As you can imagine, as the temperature increases, so does water consumption. So make sure that during the hot weather, the birds have access to clean, fresh water, just as they would in the cool time. All right, so let's move on to egg production. Now, the beginning of egg production depends on the breed, right? So some breeds will mature early while others are going to mature later. So depending on the breed, you'll get eggs as early as even 18 weeks. But you really don't want them to start laying too soon, right? So there are ways in which you can slow down that development, and we'll talk about it later. So I have here on this slide the different breeds of birds that and showing their onset of egg production. So our very early maturers are going to be like the white leghorns, right? And that's typically what the breed that's used in a lot of the commercial houses, especially the caged systems. And then our New Hampshire, they also start producing eggs early. Then we have our early to moderately early, and these are some of the more common ones that we find in the backyard flocks, like the Rhode Island Red, the Plymouth Rock, the Australorp, the Orpington Delaware, and the Americano. These birds are the early to moderately early producers. And our slow birds are going to be our ornamental birds, the pretty birds, the silkies and the Brahmas and the cochins, those kind of birds that typically are taken to shows. They will mature at a later date. They take longer. All right, so I've stuck in here now some facts and fictions. Again, I spoke about this on the first slide. Hens need to be around a rooster in order to lay. That's fiction. A hen is going to lay an egg whether or not a rooster is around. Fact, if you want the option of replacement chicks, you need to have a few roosters. Yes, that is true. And we try to stock them, say, 1 rooster to every 10 hens. Now, if you have 8 hens and 1 rooster, that's okay too. If you have 6 hens and 1 rooster, that's okay too. But you don't want to have 2 roosters and 4 hens, or 2 roosters and 6 hens, because the roosters are going to fight. They're going to fight over the girls. They're going to fight each other. So we have to make sure that we have the right stocking density, as we would say, of roosters to hens. Also, you want to provide nest boxes that are about 12 inches by 12 inches and fill that with whether straw or any other nesting material. I'll talk more about nesting materials further down. And provide 1 box for about 4 to 5 hens, right? That would be enough. Now, if you have 5 hens and you want 5 boxes, that's okay, right? Because they'll find the box that they like. Pullets should begin getting their layer ration at 18 weeks old to prepare them for egg production, right? Because that layer ration has those nutrients that will prepare the bird's body for producing an egg. Depending on the breed, they'll start laying as early as 20 weeks old. So make sure you start giving them that layer ration at the right time. They'll also begin exhibiting nesting behaviors before they start laying. So you have to look out for those behaviors and I'll tell you a little bit more about that they'll exhibit as an indication that they're getting ready to lay. Eggs are laid early, typically in the morning, but you should check in the evening also, because some birds will lay at a later time during the day. So make sure that you check not only in the morning for eggs, but also in the afternoon. Some more layer facts. Day length influences egg production, right? So the shorter the day, the less likely they lay, right? Birds lay less during short days. They require at least 14 to 16 hours of light per day if you want maximum egg production. And for those of you who actually have birds who are layers, or you're already growing layers, you will know that during the fall and winter months, when natural daylight reduces or shortens, you get less eggs, right? That's the time when I get all of these calls, my birds aren't laying, right? They need at least 14 to 16 hours of daylight for their reproductive system to be triggered to lay, right? They are photostimulated, they depend on light. Now, if you have an area where you can close those birds in, or that you're keeping your birds in cages, then you can give them artificial light, because it doesn't matter whether it's sunlight or if it's artificial light. They just need to have 14 to 16 hours of light. If this is not done, production will fall and the birds might even enter into a natural molt. I'll talk a little bit more about molting further down. Birds also will try to brood a clutch of eggs. And a clutch of eggs is a number of eggs that each birds are pre-programmed, so to speak, as to what their clutch is. So for one bird, it might be 7 eggs, another it might be 6, one it might be 12, one it might be 10. And if these eggs are, if you have a number of different birds laying in one nest, well, that clutch number can be achieved quickly, right? So if you're going to eat the eggs and you're not going to hatch them or allow the birds to hatch the eggs, you need to discourage the birds from brooding a clutch. Because if, say, one hen has a clutch of 8, there's 8 eggs in that nest, she'll go in and sit and start trying to hatch those eggs. So that's what you have to look out for if you are going to eat these eggs, or even if you're going to artificially incubate them yourself. When a hen becomes broody, she stops laying, right? Because her clutch is there, she stops laying and she starts incubating, and she can become aggressive. You want to discourage broody hens by building, you can build what we call a Broody Pen. It's kind of like a timeout pen, and it has pebbles on the floor instead of litter. So it's kind of rough for them, and they won't be encouraged to be sitting. Now, if you want the hens to raise their own chicks, well, you can let her get her clutch and incubate them naturally. Or if you still want chicks and you want them to continue laying, you can collect the eggs, store them, and incubate them artificially, right? So when you pick up the eggs daily, the bird will continue laying, right? If you don't pick up the eggs, again, they'll get that clutch. Incubators come in different sizes, and as you can imagine, the cost varies. It can be as cheap as, say, $58.50, and I haven't upgraded that cost yet. That particular foam incubator is probably about $70 now, and it can go much higher depending on how many birds you have and how many eggs you incubate each time. So what do you need for your new hen house? You're gonna need nest boxes, of course, because you want layers, right? So small flock growers can get very innovative and inventive when it comes to to setting up their birds' houses. And you can see that old television set there that somebody just put some nesting material in, and there you have a nest box. Somebody else used pans, buckets, or you can go ahead and buy the commercial one. We try to encourage you to make the nest boxes about 2 feet above the ground, right? Give that bird some exercise. Let her, fly up to get into the nest boxes. And you want to add a perch in the front of it also for them to come out and stand on before they get back down. So try and add a perch to your nest box and try to elevate the boxes. Nesting material, again, is important, and you should put a nesting material that would absorb moisture, and that will help to keep the eggs clean. And here I have some examples of some common nesting materials. So we have pine shavings. very common here. You can use peat moss, rice hulls, chopped corn cob straw, or you can purchase the Excelsior nest pads commercially, or you can also use shredded paper. But whatever material you use, it should be non-toxic and it should be absorptive. And of course, you want something that's inexpensive. Okay. So, as you know, egg production is calcium dependent, right? So that's why the layer diet is higher in calcium than the other poultry diets. You can supplement their diet by giving them crushed eggshells. That's okay. You crush the eggshells and give them, that's okay. You can give that to them. Some people are a bit hesitant to do so, thinking that the birds will start eating the eggs. No, if your birds are eating the eggs, it's a behavior that's learned. So they have to, it can be something within the bird. It can be a metabolic reason why she's doing that. So, or as I said, a practiced behavior that is picked up. So it's okay to give them crushed eggshells, or you can give them oyster shells, limestone crumbles. You can just scatter those in the house or around the yard, and they pick that up. Your young first year layers, they're gonna give you the best egg production, right? And the best egg quality too. And of course, if your egg quality is good, you'll also get the best hatch from your younger birds. The older the hen becomes, the lower their rate of production will be, and their shell quality is gonna also change. So the shell is gonna get thinner. And also, sometimes you find those shellless eggs, and the eggs can also get larger as the birds get older. All right, so again, ensure that the house is equipped with the nest boxes and nesting material. You want to train the layers to use the nest boxes to avoid them laying on the floors or in the bushes in the yard or around corners. You know, you want them to lay in the nest boxes. So the nest boxes must be there and be ready before the pullets start displaying their nesting behavior. Okay, the first egg that the pullet lay will be very small, and it's called a peewee egg, right? We don't want to incubate peewee eggs if these are fertile eggs, and because you won't get peewee chicks. So just don't incubate those eggs. So egg quality is important, whether or not you are going to hatch the eggs or if you're going to eat the eggs. Egg quality includes the cleanliness of shells, the soundness of the shell, the thickness of the albumin, and the color of the yolk. Now, how you can impact quality will not be the thickness of the yolk and the color of the yolk, right? But you can have an impact as an egg producer on the external qualities of the egg. If you'll be hatching eggs, it's important to maintain the hatching potential of these eggs, right? So improper handling and storage of the egg, that's going to reduce the ability of that egg to hatch to give you a good quality chick. Eggs can be broken because you don't have the adequate amount of nesting material, nor the appropriate type of nesting material. Or it could be that you're not collecting the eggs often enough, so the birds that keep going in and out of these nest boxes, the likelihood of the eggs getting cracked or broken or dirtied and soiled increases the longer the egg stays in that nest box. So I'll move right into talking about egg collection based on my previous comments. So whether the eggs are to be hatched or eaten, you want to collect them frequently. For the best hatching eggs should be collected at least 4 times a day. So if that's why you're going to be growing these birds to hatch the eggs, you go out there and collect those eggs at least 4 times a day to reduce the possibility of them getting damaged. Because the longer the egg stays in the nest, the more likely it is that it can be broken or soiled. If you leave the eggs for an extended period in these nest boxes, you can have some pre-incubation taking place, right? And this can reduce the hatch and the chick quality. If you leave the eggs for an extended period, it can result in the downgrade of those eggs that we eat, right? So even if it's not fertile eggs, you leave them, if you leave them in the nest boxes for an extended period, remember the birds are gonna go and start sitting on them so they can get dirty, they can get cracked, and them brooding those eggs can also reduce the grade of the eggs. Eggs that are laid late in the day should be collected. We don't want to leave them until the next day. Now, we're going to move on to cleaning eggs. And you'll see this on this slide, we're going to be talking about cleaning hatching eggs, because how you clean the hatching eggs and how you clean the table eggs are different processes. So if the hatching eggs are dirty, you try to remove the debris with a dry cloth. You never want to use a wet cloth, nor do you want to use sandpaper. Always a dry cloth. Why? A wet towel will spread disease organisms over the shell. So instead of you wiping off a disease organism, you're spreading them over the shell. And sandpaper is going to remove the protective cuticle of the shell. And that's the last layer that's added to that egg while it is being laid, right? So if you've ever seen a bird laying an egg, and if you pick it up immediately after she lays it, 2 things you'll notice: it's very warm and it's also moist. So that moisture is that cuticle that when it dries, it forms that cuticle that protects the inside of the shell from penetration of microbes through the pores, because the egg shells are porous. And you do not want to set dirty eggs, because bacteria will penetrate the egg and that will kill that embryo inside. And it can also cause an egg to explode in the incubator before it is hatched. And if it explodes, then all of the bacteria is of course spread across the other eggs that are in that incubator. So don't set dirty eggs. After you've cleaned the hatching eggs, you have to store them. So they should be cooled to a temperature that's below where they would develop into an embryo. And the best temperature for that is at least 65 degrees Fahrenheit down to about 55. So between 65 and 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, you can store them there and they can retain their hatching potential. They can be stored at this temperature for about a week without reducing the possibility of those eggs being hatched. After a week, they start to lose that ability, right? They can hatch, they'll still hatch, but you won't get the amount of eggs. Say if you set 30 eggs and you have them stored for about 2 weeks, all 30 will not be hatching, right? You'll drop the amount, the hatch rate for that batch of eggs that you have there. So after a week, they begin to lose their ability to hatch for each day held. So you want to set them soon after you store them. All right, so if you're gonna hatch them yourself and not allow the birds to hatch them, well, you're gonna need an incubator. And on this slide, I have pictures of different types of incubators. Incubators are available for purchase on the internet and even some of the farm stores. The size that you get will depend on the size of your operation. So if you're not if you're not hatching a whole bunch of eggs like I have down here in this incubator, well, you don't need one that size, right? The eggs are going to remain in the incubator for 21 days. And that's 21, you start seeing them. As a matter of fact, at day 20, you start seeing the chicks starting to pip to get out of those eggs. The best incubator that you get should be one that can maintain the right humidity, temperature, and also turns, because that's how the bird typically does that. If she's incubating it herself, she'll turn the egg, say, every 90 minutes. The temperature in the incubator is very critical, but most of these incubators that you get to buy come preset with the right temperature and humidity. And of course, the cost is going to depend on the size of the incubator you get and the complexity of that incubator unit that you purchase. All right, so let us talk about cleaning table eggs. As I said, cleaning table eggs is different from cleaning hatching eggs. For table eggs, first thing you want to do is separate the clean eggs from the dirty and the cracked eggs. The cracked eggs should not be sold, and leaking eggs should not be consumed by humans. Dirty eggs should be washed. So these table eggs can be washed, remember, but hatching eggs should never be washed. So the dirty eggs should be washed, but using water that is warmer than the temperature of the egg. If it is colder than the egg, then that water can be pulled inside the egg. And of course, the water is not clean. So it's safer not to wash eggs at all than to wash them with water that is cooler than the eggs. Eggs that do not need washing, they can be wiped off with a dry, clean cloth. Storing table eggs is also different from storing or hatching eggs. You want to refrigerate them soon after you collect them and clean them. Right? The temperature where you store them should be about 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, and that will maintain the eggs for an extended period of time. You can keep table eggs for a long period. Heat, if you store them in a hot area, that's going to break down the protein structure of the egg and will also cause a loss of moisture, right? If it loses moisture, it's going to downgrade the egg. So we start off with, say, a AA grade. And if you store them in a hot place, they can be reduced quickly to a B grade egg. Storing in the home refrigerator, that will store down the process of that albumin thinning that will take place if you store it outside, and that yolk thickening. So you can store them in that home refrigerator. And eggs that are stored at the proper temperature can be held up to a month without significant loss in the quality of that egg. All right, so we're moving on. Now I'm going to give you some reasons why your hens might stop laying. I get questions a lot from small flock producers about hens stop laying, and there are a number of reasons why they may stop laying. And the first one I have here is the decline in day length. And I did speak a little bit about that. Hens are sensitive to day length. So a short day is going to discourage egg production. And this is especially true during the latter parts of summer and fall, right? When the day shortens, you'll notice that your birds are not laying as much. How do you fix this? Well, if you give them artificial lighting, that they'll get that 14 to 16 hours of light each day, then they can continue laying no matter what season of the year it is. So if you have a house that you can keep your birds in, and if the day starts to shorten, then you can give them that artificial light. You'll still have eggs for that end of summer, fall period. So the second reason is improper nutrition. So if you're not giving your hens a balanced diet, they will not continue laying. Each egg contains a significant amount of protein and energy, so that layer needs a high energy diet. Too little dietary energy is going to depress that egg production. Also, if we have an imbalance in amino acid, this can also result in a depressed egg production. Now, each egg contains about 2 grams of calcium, and the hen skeleton contains about 20 grams of calcium. Therefore, each egg will represent about 10% of the hen's total body calcium. So you have to make sure that this the body reserve will be depleted rapidly if it is not being replaced in the diet. Insufficient salt also depress egg production. And on the other hand, too much salt will depress egg production. And too much salt can be a problem if you're using well water. So you can get your well water tested to make sure that it's not too salty, because that will depress your egg production. And the owners, I always encourage small producers to buy your prepared layer ration, right? Buy your layer ration at the feed store, and don't try to formulate your own diet. A lot of times people try to do this. Sometimes they want to make their own little organic diet, and they mix different things in. It's important that they get the micronutrients and the macronutrients that are added to the diet, the vitamins, the minerals that are added to the diet, that calcium, extra calcium that's added to that layer diet. So that's why I always encourage you to purchase the feed from that commercial feed producer, or if you're going to formulate the feed yourself, make sure that the right quantity of each nutrient is in that layer diet. And again, you can also provide that particulate source of calcium, such as the oyster shell or that ground up limestone pebbles. You can add that in the feeding area for the birds. A third reason why they may stop laying is broodiness. Some breeds become more broody than others, right? Like the Orpington, that's a broody bird, right? So these broody birds are usually good mothers, so they want to hatch these eggs. So if you allow them to be broody, expect that they will stop laying, right? So if it's a case where you want them to hatch their own eggs, well, expect that the amount of eggs you're getting is going to be less. But if it's a case where you are collecting the eggs to eat the eggs, you know that you have to try to prevent them from getting too broody. So picking up the eggs, very important, because if you allow the eggs to accumulate in the nest, then they'll become broody. And you'll see this broody problem being more prevalent during the spring period. And again, how you prevent this? Pick up the eggs at least once a day to prevent those hens from building a clutch. And you can also put them in that broody pen. that will help to disrupt their attraction to a specific nest. The fourth reason for that hens might stop laying is that they are entering into a molt. So after producing for several months, it becomes increasingly more likely that they'll molt. Now, molting and egg production are not compatible, right? So if they start to molt, then they'll stop producing. During this time of molting, or this molt period that they go through, they'll shed their old feathers and replace them with new feathers. And also their reproductive tract is going to regress, right? And during this time, and this allows them to be rejuvenated. It's like they went to a spa for a month and then they come back ready to lay again, right? So that's what happened during that molting period. When they are rejuvenated, they start laying again as they were before they started molting, and the egg production and quality will also improve after they've completed their molt. Now, naturally, molting will coincide with day length, right? So they'll molt in the fall. All birds will molt in the fall if they're not given that extra light period, right? They'll go through that molt period. Now, if you have them in a house where they use artificial light, then they can molt anytime of the year, because after a period of molting, after they reach to a certain age, they will automatically begin to molt, whether or not it's fall, whether or not the day length gets shorter. But during this time, they'll not all molt together. One will start molting, then another starts molting, then another. So you see your egg production gradually going down as the number of birds that have begun molting increases. Now, after they've gone through their molt, they will return to laying again, right? But if you want your eggs to be produced, there is a way you can deal with that by forcing them all to molt at the same time. The next reason is the age of the hen, right? A hen can live for many years. The last time I checked, a regular chicken, the oldest was 26 years. That's a long time. That's an old bird, right? But an aging hen will eventually lose its ability to reproduce actively. So don't expect that you're going to be getting the same production of eggs, because this particular bird has always been producing, giving you six eggs every week after week. But now that she's 3 years old, she's giving you one per week. As they get older, they'll reduce the number of eggs that they produce until they stop producing. So how do you remedy this? You replace your aging hens with a new flock of birds, right? So you have to replace them with younger birds. And the sixth reason I have is disease. There are many poultry diseases that will affect egg production. So say it's not the fall and it's a young batch of birds, you're giving them that commercial diet that has everything in, so they're getting everything that they need, but they're not producing. It may be a disease. Sometimes they'll show signs of disease, but sometimes they do not show any sign. But if you do suspect a disease, you should consult that poultry vet, not the vet down the road that looks after the cats and dogs. You have to consult a poultry vet, right? A timely diagnosis is very effective to control diseases, because you don't want it to be spreading to other birds in the flock. And also there are certain virulent diseases, such as highly pathogenic AI, and that may prevent, if you diagnose this quickly, if you get this diagnosed quickly, that can prevent the loss of an entire flocks of birds within the region, right? So make sure that you look out for any signs of disease. Also, you can, there are certain virulent diseases which may cause risk of transmission to other animals and also to humans. So always consult, you can just consult your county agent for the nearest poultry diagnostic lab, and you submit your birds for evaluation. And the state of Georgia has a lot of poultry vets, so there is somebody to help. All right. So we're coming on to the end of the presentation, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about bird behavior. So there are good behaviors and bad behaviors. And birds exhibit a number of different types of behaviors. And for the most part, they are natural, especially the birds you have in your backyard. It's important, birds' behavior can be used to assess the welfare of the birds, how well they're doing. Some people might even say how happy they are, right? So they do some behaviors for pleasure, or it might be a behavior that's necessary for them to function biologically. It's important for the well-being of birds that they are allowed to perform these natural behaviors. And if they are not able to perform these behaviors, you see it manifesting in different ways where they start to practice some destructive behaviors. So some of these natural behaviors that we want to see are egg laying, of course, you want them to lay naturally, foraging, roosting, dust bathing, and preening. And these are some of the good behaviors that will, if they are allowed to do it, you can say, well, the bird is behaving naturally. And I won't say happy because I'm not a bird, but some welfare advocates would say, yes, the birds are happy based on these behaviors. We spoke about egg laying already and egg laying behavior. Birds are gonna, okay, we have spoken about egg laying before, but we want, let me just go back and say a little bit more on egg laying behavior. Your pullets will start to display egg laying behaviors early. So that's why it's necessary for the cages, for the pens to be ready for these pullets, right? So they'll start looking for places to nest. They'll start making a little nest. You can watch them in the yard and see. They'll make a little burrow and a little nest for where they lay, right? If you have older birds, they'll watch the older birds, what they do, and then they'll imitate them, right? So these egg laying behaviors can start, you can start see them displaying them as early as 2 weeks before they actually lay the first egg. That's why it's important to have the houses ready, because you don't want for them to start laying and they don't have a nest box and they start laying on the floor. Because if they start laying on the floor, it's going to be difficult for you to stop them from laying on the floor. If they go around corners and start laying in bushes because you never had a nest box ready for them to start for them to practice with, then it's going to be difficult for you to stop them from doing that. All right. So then we have foraging. And what is foraging really? It involves the ground pecking, scratching, any movement, you see them moving around together, whether or look for food or water, right? And birds do this naturally to sample new food sources. It's a behavior that they've taken from their ancestors. We have domestic birds now, birds that have been domesticated for hundreds of years now, but they still have that foraging behavior that they carry with them, where their ancestors used to sample different foods in different areas as they migrated across the land. So our modern domestic birds still find it's within them to do this, to carry out this activity of foraging. Again, it's associated with a feeding behavior, but it occurs even if they have food, right? Even if they have food, they show it as something that they feel like they must do. We've seen where birds are raised in cages, like the commercial layers, and you have 5, 6 birds in cage. If they are not allowed to do this, they get frustrated and they start pecking at others. So if we prevent them from doing this behavior, they may develop that increased pecking behavior that can be very destructive. If you have your birds in a pen, you can provide some substance in the pen that they can peck. So this cracked corn, yes, you can just throw that in the pen area or out in the yard where they can go and peck at that, so that they can do this, carry out this foraging behavior. Then we have that roosting behavior. So under natural conditions in the wild, birds are going to roost, right? And they do this to get up from off the ground and away from the ground predators. So if you provide perches inside the house, that gives them vertical space, right? So they can go up. We also encourages exercise for the birds, which will increase their bone strength. And this is good for our laying hens, because we have a lot of issues with bone strength or bone maladies in commercial layers. So them having somewhere to fly up and perch, that will help to give them that exercise that they need. It also relieves social tension. So you have some birds, I'm sure you've heard of the pecking order, right? It comes from growing birds. So you have birds that are more dominant than others. So the less dominant or the more submissive birds they should be provided these spaces where they can get up and away from the more dominant ones. Birds that are not allowed to roost shows signs of agitation and increased pacing. And we of course, again, see this a lot in a cage system where there are no roosts provided. So you see the bird consistently or constantly moving back and forth within that cage area. Preening. We consider preening a comfort behavior. It's a self-directed behavior that involves the manipulation of the feather with the beak. So you'll see them going through their feathers, and you might think, well, they're picking insects off. But preening behavior, they're actually taking oil from the uropygial gland, which is on top of their tail feather, and they take oil from it and they spread it around on their feathers. And that helps to keep the feathers subtle and water resistant. Preening can also indicate irritation of the feather follicle, especially during that time that they are molting. So, it's starting to itch them, that new feather is coming out. And you don't want to confuse preening with feather pecking. And you'll see birds preening each other too. Then we have dust bathing. And dust bathing involves the interaction with the environmental sources or substrates, right? So example, if you provide them with some sawdust or some sand, any loose material, and you'll see the birds swimming around or digging around in it and rolling around. And if you don't provide that somewhere that they can do that, they will certainly make dust bowls in your yard if you don't do that, if you don't provide an area for them. The function of this is to maintain the feather condition by spreading the oil, and also it helps to remove parasites and also excess oils. It's usually stimulated by the staleness of the oil in the feathers. So when after they're preened and they've spread the oil around, the oil gets too stale, then they start getting rid of it. So they start dust bathing to help to remove that. Try to provide a substrate for this activity, especially if you don't want to see your entire yard being turned into a dust bowl. So if you can provide a space for them just for that, then that will save the other areas of the yard. Some folks have added diatomaceous earth into the substrate to help to control external parasites. This is said that this mineral is an organic way of getting rid of external parasites. If the birds are not allowed to do this dust bathing activity, they can develop feather pecking activity. So now I'm going to talk about two bad behaviors that we don't want to see in our layers. Because these behaviors, it can be detrimental to themselves and to other birds, or they can be counterproductive. So if you don't control these behaviors quickly or early, you might end up having to cull the bird, or even some of the other birds that are being picked. So the two bad behaviors I have here is broody hens and feather pecking. Now, feather pecking is different from aggressive pecking. Feather loss from aggressive pecking is usually confined to the head, like this first bird you see up here. So they keep attacking them at the head, and typically it's going to be the more submissive bird that gets attacked like that. But feather pecking really begins in the back area of the bird. So look for that, because if you have increased skin exposure, it can lead to blood being drawn and that bird being cannibalized. So look out for that feather pecking in the back area to prevent the cannibalism of the bird that's being picked on, right? Because one starts picking and then another starts picking until that bird is basically killed in the pen area. So apart from being unattractive, birds with fewer feathers lose heat faster. And if they're losing heat faster, then they're going to be eating more food. So it's going to be very counterproductive. No, on the other hand, feathers that are being removed are often eaten, right? So the birds that are doing the feather pecking, they are swallowing these feathers, and this results in crop compactions because their crop, where the food is stored, is filled with feathers. And as a result, they're not eating either, so they end up with weight loss. So feather pecking can be triggered by nutritional deficiencies, right? So they're not getting enough protein in their diet, or some other nutritional or metabolic deficiency may result in feather pecking. The birds that are being denuded, you want to isolate them from the rest of the flock, right? And keep them into that isolation pen until the feathers are regrown. And then broodiness, we already spoke about broodiness, birds and their desire to hatch. Again, it's not good if you want to maximize your egg production because they'll stop laying. So you want to put that broody hen in an isolated pen that has no nest boxes or nesting material. And we'll finish up talking, just telling you about these other notable behaviors. And these behaviors are considered as natural. And if you're a bird enthusiast that just love watching your birds out in the yard, you'll spot some of these behaviors. So you see them shaking their head, scratching their head, wagging their tails, or just ruffling their feathers as they move around with other birds, or stretching their wing and their leg at the same time. So these activities are not obvious when the birds are kept in small cages, but if you have them out in wide open spaces, you'll see a lot of these activities. So look out for those behaviors next time you walk around and look at your birds. And that's the end of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dunkley. I do have a few questions. Let's go through those really quick. I'll put this in there for the survey as well. So I'm going to start with Alexia. She asked if heat lamps can be a bit of a fire hazard, and she's heard that heat plates might be a better option. Is that the case?
There are different types of heat lamps that you can use, but the heat lamp is probably more inexpensive. Of course, if you hang it too low, yes, it can be a fire hazard. If you hang it too low, as I showed you a couple of pictures where they had them hung too lowly, but as long as it's secure and above where it can get in contact with, say, the litter that you have on the floor, it should be safe.
Again, another question. They said they have an Easter egg hen who hasn't laid in 9 months. She seems healthy and is 2 years old. Is there any hope that they'll get any more eggs from her, or is she a little too old?
2 years old. No, she's not too old to be laying. She's older. If you are talking from a commercial standpoint, they would have called that bird out by, say, 110 weeks old, right? But based on that age, she said 9 months old. She should be still giving you a few eggs. So it could be that she had a disease and you didn't notice that she had a disease that probably stopped her from laying. But at this time of the year now, she wouldn't be laying a lot anyway. So keep her on for another couple of months and see.
Alexia also asked, she said she's heard that chicken eggs can store at room temperature for some time if they haven't been washed. Is that the case?
Eggs can be stored for a long time, washed or not washed. Table eggs, right? As long as the temperature is not hot, right? So if you are storing it in a cool place, if inside of your house is always 65 degrees Fahrenheit, it can be stored on the counter for a period of time. It won't spoil, but the grade will drop, right? So it will move from that AA grade where it started and get down to a B grade. And you can tell this by the size of the air cell. And of course, the white will start getting even more watery, and then the yolk will start to coagulate. So the protein will break down in the egg, but it doesn't mean that it's spoiled. And a lot of people prefer to, if you're gonna make, say, deviled eggs or boiled eggs, if you store them outside for a while and allow them to downgrade a little bit, it gives you it peels easier, so to speak. But yes, I have stored eggs on my countertop for 8 weeks, and the grade goes down, but it's not spoiled.
It's good to know. Didn't know that. And Jay had just asked for you to quickly go over the washing temperature of the water when you're going to eat the eggs.
Okay, so when you're gonna eat the eggs, the water should be hotter than the eggs. Let's get back up there. Right, so the water should be warmer than the eggs or hotter than the eggs, because if the water is colder than the egg, the water can be pulled in, right, into the egg, because that egg is warmer than the water, right? So that's why it's important that the water be warmer than the temperature of the egg.
Kim wants to know about getting her water tested for the salt and what level of salt is ideal for egg production.
I don't have the level. I don't have what level it is, because they need salt too, but it can't be too salt, right? So salt is a part, it's already a part of their feed. So you don't want the water also to be salty. The eggs, the testing of the water, I'm not sure where you go to do that. I don't know if they do that at the county level. Do they do that, Carol? I know
We
that
do, but I've never had anyone ask about salt levels before. I would have to
yeah,
look
but
at that.
I think the profile would show if it has sodium in it and chlorine.
Yeah, if somebody has a question about that, they can send me an email and we can look that up and get the right test for you.
Right.
And then Jay also just asked about storing the eggs on the counter. Is there a reason to do it other than the degradation? Or is it just like when you have a specific recipe that's when you would do it to get that result? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I would say yes, right? I'm not telling you to store your eggs on the countertop because you want your egg grade to stay high, right? So you want to actually make sure that you refrigerate them. If you don't want them to be downgraded, you refrigerate them within 72 hours, 36 to 72 hours, right? Make sure you refrigerate them, okay? If you want to keep the grades high. If you're gonna make deviled eggs, well, keep them on your countertop for a little while and then you boil them. They peel easier when they get older, right? So basically refrigerating them is slowing down the breakdown process in that egg.
And we have one final question. Is there anything that we can do to encourage hens to go broody if you want them to raise a clutch of eggs?
What can you do to make them broody?
Yes.
It depends on the breed, because some breeds are just not broody, right? So if you want them to hatch the eggs, right? The broodiness is an inbred thing. It's an ingrained thing in them. So if you don't want them to hatch the eggs and you're picking up the eggs every day, well, they won't brood. But whenever you want them to start hatching the eggs themselves, just leave the eggs alone and then they'll brood them. As long as the breed is, and most hens are, but like the white leghorns, they're not very broody. They're not good mothers, right? I don't know if I should say that, but the white leghorns are not as broody. And but like the Rhode Island Red, the New Hampshire Red, the Upprington, the Dominicas, they are very broody birds. So, and those are typically the breeds that the small flock producer will grow. The backyard flock producer will grow. Right. So as long as you want them to hatch the eggs, you just don't pick them up and they'll brood them, because it's a natural behavior for birds. That's why they lay eggs. They're not laying eggs for us to eat. They lay the eggs to produce a chick. So if you leave the eggs there, they'll hatch them.
Rania wants to know if they should administer vaccine to prevent certain diseases, and I know the answer is yes, but we need to, if you haven't watched our other episodes in the webinar series, you might want to go back and look at those because we talk about diseases in depth
Okay,
in those as well. Mhm.
okay, good. I
But-
mean, if you only have 5 birds, no.
Mhm.
But if you have a bunch of birds that you're raising and you're getting eggs and you're selling, yeah, you need to make sure. Did you have somebody talk about biosecurity?
Yes, Dr. Ritz talked about
Okay.
those things in one of the previous ones.
Okay, yeah.
But other than that, that is the end of our questions. So thank you all for being so attentive, and thank you, Dr. Dunkley, for presenting for us this evening.
You're
If
welcome.
any of you have other questions, you can send me an email and we can
Yes.
follow up with that way. And
Yes.
I'll send out some additional information through the Eventbrite link tomorrow for all of you that are registered.
Okay.
But that's all I have for the evening. So thank you very much.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.